Hello, it's Lauren Ohayon from Restore Your Core. And today I want to talk about a tool that I use a lot and it gets a lot of attention on social media whenever I teach it. And that is the tool of wagging your tailbone. Sometimes I refer to it as unraveling your anus. I think people love it for a variety of reasons because it helps really create awareness, sensation, and a map to a part of the body that is often not even talked about, much less encouraged to explore. So just a little bit of context about what first. We'll start with the what. So the tailbone, let's just do a little visual. The tailbone we have here I'll just show it to you this is looking in from the front. So this is if I were to stick my finger from the front all the way back. The tailbone is the bottom of your spine. A lot of times people think of it as part of the pelvis, and it's definitely part of the pelvis, but it is actually the spine, which I think is just very cool. And then it has all these pelvic floor muscles attached to it, surrounding it, controlling important function like urination, defecation, and a myriad of other, sexual functions, orgasm, childbirth, all those things, right? So the pelvic floor is right here, connecting parts of the pelvic floor connect right into the tailbone. So the tailbone is like the posterior portion of your pelvic floor. And then what a lot of people also don't realize about the tailbone is that there is this tiny joint there. So it's this tiny joint, and the tailbone therefore is capable of movement, a little bit of movement, not a lot, but a little bit. And that little bit is important, right? If all these muscles connect onto it, that tiny bit of movement through the tailbone is really important. It's a really nice way to connect. It's a nice way to gauge. It's a nice way to, again, draw that map to the pelvic floor and to that part of your spine. I think so much of the work that we do with our clients can be very binary. Okay, now we're going to squeeze and contract our pelvic floor. Now we're going to squeeze our anus. But we are very rarely asked to connect to the bones of the pelvic floor. This is a way to connect to a bone, and it's a way to connect to this movable bone that has all these pelvic floor muscles attached to it. A lot of people are really congested. So that's kind of the what. Now the why. A lot of people are very congested in the tailbone region. People complain of a lot of tailbone pain. People get hemorrhoids, which is obviously like an anal, more happening in the rectum anal region, but it's all connected there. It's all the same system. People present with a hypertonic pelvic floor, specifically in that posterior region. People grip their glutes and their butts. We have postural patterns where our hips are very far forward, again, shoving the tailbone into one spot. So kind of the tailbone becomes very immobilized via movement patterns, postural patterns. And we, as pelvic floor professionals or movement professionals, we are really curious and invested in bringing function back into the pelvic floor. But if that is not including all the parts of the pelvic floor, like the tailbone, then we're really, it's incomplete. I do share a lot of tools on how to get this done, right? Like, how do you help someone wag their tailbone? There are so many ways to do it. So I'll just kind of go through a few of them, or one of them, two of them. I want to also say, before we begin the exploration, I teach it a lot on different areas. You can find that. So the point of this video is to give a little bit more context and color. But I also want to say, when would you use this? Which client would you use this with? Who do I use this with? It's a great tool to use with any client, but specifically ones who are hypertonic. They struggle to feel. People who struggle to, when you do like a reverse Kegel. So you have somebody do a really long, slow contraction of their pelvic floor, but then they can't do a long, slow contraction down. This is a wonderful tool. People who feel really disconnected from their pelvic floor, their pelvic region, this is a great one. So it is a little bit more obscure, right? Like we're kind of used to like, I can do things with my hand, do things with my foot. We're having to get very, very, very different, like a really different relationship with that part of our body to create that movement. Now remember, there is movement possible there. The tailbone can wag back and forth. It's small. I never, ever cue people to do it by contracting the pelvic floor muscles. Rather, we try to get the bone to move. And as the bone is moving, the pelvic floor is doing what the pelvic floor needs to do to make that happen. That's like saying, if I want to open a door, I'm first going to try to contract all my arm muscles, and hopefully the movement of my hand will happen. That's not what you do. You move your hand and your muscles facilitate. So the same thing here. We're trying to move the pelvic floor, trying to move the tailbone, and the pelvic floor muscles will facilitate. That is a lot of what we do here at Restore Your Core, and a lot of what we are doing in the professional trainings that I teach are a myriad of ways to get people to get their pelvic floor to be doing that, rather than trying to facilitate it muscularly. We're trying to get the muscular action facilitated by movement. It's a very different way of looking at the pelvic floor. We are so used to being told just to squeeze and release it, but this is actually like, wait a minute. Why don't we just get the pelvic floor doing its job? So the first way I have people do this is by feeling their pelvic floor. It's nice to connect to the bone. Where is it? What is it? Sorry, the tailbone. I said pelvic floor, but it's kind of the same thing. You can, there's various ways to do it. You can have someone put their foot up on a stool. So I have my stool here. You can get someone to stick their butt back a bit. I always tell people, like, slide your hand down your butt crack, and like you go from hard to soft. If you find a hole, you've gone too far, right? So it's that hard bone right at the top of your butt crack, and right below it is soft tissue. So that's how you know you're on your tailbone. And the very first thing we're doing is just getting in there and creating the map. So we are just massaging it, telling the brain, this is where it is. We're talking about the tailbone. Now we're touching the tailbone. So we're creating all these points of references, all this evidence to the brain that there is this thing there called the tailbone. So first we're defining what it is to the brain. Once it's there, we're now thinking about creating movement with it. So this is where it can get tricky for people. Now we can do it standing, lying down, hands and knees. There's a variety of ways to do this because we're all standing right now, or I am at least. We'll start with standing. I always tell people to imagine there's something like a yoga strap tied to that bone that we just touched. And you want to be able to kind of swing the strap forward and backward. So between the legs and away from the legs. What people will start doing is a big movement here, which is fine. So we can start by just kind of moving the whole structure. And then we say, okay, now can you dial it down, quiet it down, and where your tailbone is, can you just think about moving it forward and backward? And at this point, nothing is really moving except for the tailbone within the pelvic floor. So, it's, if people are still doing this, we're going way too big, and the noise of all this will overshadow the subtlety of the tailbone. So we just have to be careful with that. So there's not a lot of movement anymore. Their hand can still be there, and they're just starting to embody that front to back movement again. Your first date with this, you might not get it. Your fifth date with it, you might not get it. You have to keep coming back again and again and again to really learn this tool. It took me a while to get it. Now I can't not get it. Like I can wag my tailbone wherever I go, which is really useful. Another way to do it is lying on your back. You can even do it sitting in a chair. I'll show you that in a minute, but you lie on your back. And it's the same idea. You can do big movements, this pelvic movement, tucking and untucking. That's the direction that the tailbone will be moving in. You quiet your movements down, and then it's like, can you just wag? And I can do it much easier here, and I can feel my whole sacrum kind of responding. I'm not saying that my sacrum is doing a big motion. We know that the sacrum doesn't do big motions, but I can feel my entire, from tailbone all the way up, I can feel all of this reacting and responding as I wag my tailbone on my back. And then again, you can do it sitting in a chair. And when you sit in a chair or on the floor on a yoga block, a lot of your clients won't have the mobility maybe to sit on a block. So what we don't want happening when we have a client sitting here is we don't want them rounding back at all. We want 0, none, nothing post tilt. So they have to be right up on their sitting bones. So that's where I think a chair is probably easier for most people. And then their feet are flat on the floor. This takes a lot of mobility. And it can be on the floor in this position. But again, this may not be accessible to most people. I like this position a lot because I like that you can kind of get right up on your perineum. And then the tailbone is free. And the sitting bones, we're sitting on the sitting bones, but we just have a little bit more access here. So some people shifting forward, they might, now that the tailbone is angled backward, they might feel it differently or better or more or less. And it's the same thing. Maybe they need to tilt and tuck and untuck their pelvis a few times. That's a larger motion. Then we go into more specificity. We quiet the movement down and we see if we can just get the tailbone wagging forward and backward. I don't know that I would use all 3 tools with somebody all at once, but if they're not getting it standing or they're not getting it lying down, you give them the options. But it's always good to remind your clients that this tool is a tool that requires more than just one date, and it builds over time. My clients who have learned it and our professionals who go through our professional training course have reported back to me that their clients absolutely love it too. So my clients really find it useful. I know many of our pro clients have found it useful. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video. I hope it gives you more context about how important it is to, again, facilitate the pelvic floor by accessing the pelvis, the spine, and the structure around it, and not just trying to get muscles to do something, but rather facilitating function. Thank you so much for joining.